Donald Trump has struck a world-first deal with El Salvador to deport criminals to, quote, hell on earth. The country has agreed not only to take back its own criminals, but also violent criminals from any country. US top diplomat Marco Rubio had this to say.
First, obviously, he continues with full cooperation on the returning of Salvadorians who find themselves illegally in the United States and welcome them back home. And that's already existing, and that will continue. But second, he has agreed to accept for deportation any illegal alien in the United States who is a criminal from any nationality, be they MS-13 or Tren de Aragua, and house them in his jails. And third, he has offered to house in his jails dangerous American criminals in custody in our country, including those of U.S. citizenship and legal residence.
President Nayib Bukele has already achieved what Donald Trump seemingly wants to do in America. He has brutally cracked down on gangs and has turned El Salvador from one of the most dangerous countries in the world to one of Latin America's safest in just 5 years. Bukele used the military to lock up over 60,000 gang members, which did the trick, but earned him accusations of authoritarianism. The Trump administration has been keen to lay down the law with its neighbours since taking office. The president geared up to implement swingeing tariffs against Mexico and Canada, until the two backed down and agreed to heavily police their borders with the United States.
Is there any chance that Canada or China could also get out of the tariffs after you struck a deal with Mexico?
Well, nobody's out with Mexico. We had a great talk with Mexico, and we had President Sheinbaum is a woman. I like her very much. We've had good relationships, but we have to stop fentanyl from coming in, whether I like somebody or not, and we have to stop the illegal aliens from coming in. I think we've lost 200,000 people on average a year for many years, much higher than the 100,000. Could be even closer to 300,000. And they've agreed to put in 10,000 soldiers permanently, like forever, 10,000 soldiers at their side of the border and stop fentanyl and illegal aliens from coming into our country. They have a big incentive to do. Other than that, we've agreed to talk and consider various other things. We haven't agreed on tariffs yet. I also spoke with Prime Minister Trudeau of Canada, and we had a good talk in the morning, but I did ask him a couple of questions, like, banks aren't allowed to do business in Canada. Canada is very tough. Canada is very, we're not treated well by Canada, and we have to be treated well. Banks are not, as an example, allowed. Did you know that American banks are not allowed to do business in Canada? Can you believe that? And that's one of many things, and we talked about it, and I think we'll win most of the subjects. But for some reason, a lot of things have been very unfair with Canada. We've made a lot of progress on Russia. Canada is very tough. They're very, very tough to do business with. And we can't let them take advantage of the U.S. They don't take our agricultural product for the most part. They don't take our cars. They make cars, but they basically don't take our cars. And, we don't need, and look, I think we're going to have another good conversation today. We're actually speaking at 3 o'clock again. But we don't need them to make our cars. We don't need them to give us lumber. We don't need them for agricultural products because we have all the agriculture we need. They don't take our agricultural product for the most part, our milk, dairy, etc. A little bit they do, but not much. We take theirs. And as far as cars are concerned, they took in a big percentage, almost 19% of the market. And, I wouldn't mind making our cars in the United States. So we have a problem there. I'd like to make our cars in the U.S. We don't need Canada to make our cars. With that being said, we're going to have another call at 3 o'clock. We had a call this morning. It was a pretty good call, I'd say. So the call with Mexico went very well in the sense that they're very strong now on the border. They're going to put soldiers there. So, actually, they're best military soldiers, and they're going to be at the border, 10,000. That's a lot of soldiers. And they want to protect it also. They don't want people running through Mexico, coming through Mexico to come into our country.
This stands in stark contrast with a Britain that has decided to give illegal migrants a pathway to citizenship, says Chris Philp.
They've introduced a bill yesterday, you probably saw, which completely cancels the Rwanda scheme. So we can't now send people, the government, even if we wanted to, couldn't send people to Rwanda. That would have worked. That would have stopped the channel crossings. We saw it work in Australia. But in government, a couple of years ago, we passed an act of parliament called the Illegal Migration Act, which said that illegal immigrants can never, ever get citizenship, right? That was the right thing to do that we did in government, the Conservatives. Labour are now going to scrap that. So illegal immigrants can get citizenship, which is a complete disgrace. And because Reform, unfortunately, stood in all those seats last summer, and they handed Labour that landslide, this is what Starmer is now doing with that landslide, giving illegal immigrants citizenship rights.
Fears are mounting the UK is heading for blasphemy laws, after it emerged Angela Rayner was heading a Council Against Islamophobia.
Yeah, so this goes back to an all-party parliamentary group definition of Islamophobia, which long before the Labour Party was in government, they adopted. But the question is, will the government now adopt this definition? And if so, what are the ramifications? And Angela Rayner has this council. They're going to consult on it. Dominic Grieve, the former Tory MP, he is going to be one of the figures involved, apparently. And I think where the debate is if you go back to the definition from this all-party parliamentary group, at the time there were warnings that the definition was far too broad and it would go beyond just stopping Muslim hate speech and trying to clamp down on this and could actually curb freedom of speech and become a de facto blasphemy law. Wherefore you couldn't really criticise religion or the Muslim faith, even when it is more of a freedom of speech angle, as opposed to something that you could say is, hate speech towards someone. So if Angela Rayner was to bring a definition, and it's not clear if it would be the definition already on the table or a different one, I think there'll be a lot of criticism probably from the Tories, Reform and others that this is going beyond the scope of what they claim it does.
And Robert Jenrick has said exactly that. This is the Trojan horse for a blasphemy law protecting Islam. He's actually gone further, saying that this Labour government displays an Orwellian disregard for freedom of speech. What do you make of that? Well, I think the freedom of speech, you can go broader in terms of some of the things that the government first did, on freedom of speech on campuses. Bridget Phillips had to row back slightly on the paused freedom of speech from the Tories. So I think that Labour have always been in a different place to the Conservatives on this. And I think the question is just what does it set in motion? Because obviously you have all these debates going on at the moment when it comes to lots of issues where people don't feel as though they've been able to say what they think. So you go back to the grooming gang scandal, for instance, and Pakistani gangs, people felt they couldn't talk about this. If you have one of these definitions, there is a risk that, legitimate conversations about concerns in communities, integration, start to go off the table if you get the definition wrong.
So when you think about it, then how much of this is about securing a vote, a Muslim-based vote for the Labour Party, as opposed to protecting religion and religious rights?
So we know that the Labour Party, when it comes to their voter base, has won lots of Muslim votes in the past. But obviously that relationship has been tested. And I think if you think about the Gaza-Palestine position, Labour has an issue with their Muslim vote. And you saw that in the most recent general election, all these pro-Gaza independents. So I think the party does feel it has to do a lot of work to get those voters back, and they want to get those voters back. On this, I'm not sure if this is seen as, the big vote winner to do that. But of course, I think it would be popular with certain groups that feel as though that they, do receive criticism or, stoking tensions. So it could play to that.
This comes after a man was arrested for burning a Quran in Manchester, while another man who burned a Quran in Sweden was shot dead. Ayaan Hirsi Ali spoke out against the danger Islamism poses to our country.
My reflection on my identity as a Muslim was sparked by what had happened on 9/11/2001. I condemned it. I furiously disagreed with the men who did what they did. And that set me off asking, well, if I disagree with them, where does that leave me? Am I a Muslim then? And further reflection on, and I thought, I do not agree with any of the moral guidelines that the Prophet Muhammad had set for me as a Muslim, and that means that renders me an unbeliever.
And that puts you at risk, that you have to have personal security, that there have been constant threats to your life since you left Islam. And this is the issue, isn't it? That there is an attempt to enforce blasphemy laws against people across the world by extremists. And this may be burning of the Quran, or it may be leaving the faith.
That's right. There are, I always say there's one Islam, and then there are two categories of Muslims. And one category of Muslims are just normal people. They identify as Muslims, go about religious duties in their daily lives. And then there's a different category of Muslim, the Islamist. And they take everything that Muhammad said and did literally, and everything in the Quran literally. And they believe, yes, if, like me, you leave the faith, the punishment is death. If you burn the Quran, as Salwan Momik did, you also deserve death. Theo van Gogh, who was not a Muslim, according to the man who killed him, had defiled the Quran, and the punishment is death. And so the number of people who believe this are growing in Europe, in Sweden, in the UK, in Germany, in France. And so you're seeing more and more of these incidents.
And in terms of burning the Quran, or indeed the Bible, it's clearly bad manners, it's aggressive, there are laws that it's conceivably against. But do you think as a general principle, people ought to be free to show that they disagree with any book, and that if they disagree with it, ultimately that must mean they should be free to burn it? Or do you think books of that kind, religious texts, ought to be protected in some special way?
I'm an American citizen and I abide by the First Amendment. And so as a matter of principle, I think that's protected speech. It's not desirable. It's not good manners. It's not great, but it is protected speech. And when I came to the Netherlands in 1992, that was the case, as was the case all over Europe. So what you're describing, Mr. Riesmog, is a conflict. It's a collision of morals and principles. And I believe that in Europe and in the rest of the West, we ought to stand up for our principles and, gently, firmly explain to those who want to impose their principles on us that we don't accept them and that we are going to protect our citizens.
Reform UK's Rupert Lowe praised Donald Trump's deportation plan as real politics.
I think it's refreshing, Michelle. I think to see a bit of real politique and a politician who actually stands his ground and does what's right for his country. I mean, I understand there was a child rapist, there was a murderer, and there was also an ISIS terrorist amongst those people who were being sent abroad. Now, I agree with Mr. Trump, and I've said it publicly about the Pakistani rape gangs, which, if we got tough with people who perpetrate crimes here, we should deport them. And I think, again, we sent £133 million to Pakistan this year. They're refusing to take some of these miscreants back. We could quite easily stop paying £133 million to Pakistan until they yield and take back those criminals who they should accept, who are here often illegally, and they're criminal. So I'm with Donald Trump. I think it's refreshing. I think some realpolitik, a bit of real government is very refreshing, and it worked. It worked very quickly.